say it that way, but when a culture moves past Christianity, it's the Christian's fault. And I believe that. Okay, I got my cordless on. I came across a story about communion. Back in the early 1800s, there was a preacher in western Pennsylvania named Thomas Campbell. He was a preacher for, are you ready for the name of the church? He was a preacher for the Old Light, Anti-Burger, Seceder, Presbyterian Church. That's the way they named their churches. There was the Old Light, Anti-Burger, Seceder, Presbyterian Church. And each one of those phrases described political divisions inside of the church, particularly the Presbyterian church of the day. So, if a church was considered an anti-burger church, they couldn't go to McDonald's. No, that's not what it meant. That's not what it meant. It had something to do with the name of the mayors in one of the countries where the people had immigrated from. And it meant that the church was opposed to any influence of the mayor to their congregation. But in some of the Presbyterian churches, the mayor in the town actually had influence about some things that would happen. And so some of the churches said, no, the mayor doesn't get to have any say. We are anti-burger churches. And they put it on the front of their church, anti-burger. Then they were Old Light. They weren't New Light, they were Old Light. And because they were Old Light, the catechism that the Presbyterians used, Old Light meant you went with the catechism. New Light meant that the scriptures could speak to the catechism, and that was New Light. But Old Light was just what the catechism said. And it caused such a division that there was New Light churches and there was Old Light churches. And this church, I got to find the name because it was such a long name. It was an Old Light. It was an Old Light, anti-burger, seceder, Presbyterian church. Whoosh. And the church was rigid in the early 1800s. Really rigid. Imagine if you belonged to a church of the day. Because we're going to take communion after a bit. And I'm telling a story. This isn't my message. This is during the offering, which they didn't take slow enough. When communion was going to be served on a given Sunday, the people from the church had to come on Saturday evening and be questioned by the ministers. This was standard practice. And the minister would ask them, do you think the mayor should have say? It was either yes or no. Do you think we should just use the catechism, or do you think the scripture should be speaking more to it? And you would say yes or no. And they would ask different questions to you, and it was either pass or fail. And if you failed, they wouldn't serve you communion the next day. Because you were a failure, and you didn't believe it exactly like they believed it. Well, this gentleman, Thomas Campbell, believed that the Lord's Supper belonged to everybody. That it was the Lord's Supper. And that if you belonged to the Lord, it was for you. And so he decided to let people take communion that said they were a Christian instead of got grilled by all the little tiny things. So he was kicked out of the Old Light, Anti-Burger, Seceder, Presbyterian Church. But he kept on ministering. You see, sometimes Christians get so bound up by all the things that they are for and against, that all we do is even isolate other Christians. But when we come to the Lord's Supper, it's His. He instituted it, not me. And so now we no longer hold that practice. If you say you're a Christian, you may not see things eye to eye with me. That's okay. if you're covered by the blood of Jesus, you can partake of communion. That's just a little touch of church history for you, just to know why perhaps we could have turned the world away at times, and even people in the church away from the church. And a lot of people in America today have been burnt by the church. They have. I know a lot of people that call themselves Christians, but they won't go to church because ugly things have happened there. God help us to not be ugly. Okay, enough of history. I'm not going to preach a full-fledged message. It only has 6 points. And I'm only going to read 12 scriptures. No, 22 scriptures. But it will be brief. It will be brief. Luke chapter 24, verse number 13 to 35 is a passage I'd like us to read today. And all I'm going to do, this is the sermonette. All I'm going to do is bring out just a couple thoughts from this text and bring them into our own little world today. Luke chapter 24, verse 13 through 25. No, 35. Now behold, 2 of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then the one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" So they said to him, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us when they did not find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." Then he said to them, "O foolish ones and slow of heart, to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther, but they constrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at table with them, that he took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us?" So they rose up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon." And they told about the things that had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. What a wonderful story in the scriptures for us to have on a day like today when we commemorate when Jesus broke bread and gave thanks and said, "Take and eat." These disciples, they weren't the 12, but they were disciples. They were followers, and they had high hopes in Jesus. They come to this juncture in their life with heavy hearts. Heavy hearts. Have you ever had a heavy heart? Maybe you have a heavy heart for one reason or another this morning. But their heart was heavy because they had pinned their hopes in Jesus, and they felt like their hopes had vanished. That's what they felt like. That's how they felt. They had seen him die, and they thought marvelous things were going to happen. And now you know, when you're dead, you're dead. That ended everything. At least that's what they thought. They had heavy hearts. And they come to this juncture. And you could be very much like them today. It could be that you have a heavy heart, or you might feel like you had put your hopes in God about something, and the hopes have vanished. They come to this point. And while they were at this point with a heavy heart, it wasn't just that their heart was heavy. Their faith was at an all-time low. See, their faith had been at an all-time high earlier when they saw Jesus do the mighty works. And he did these deeds. Then he walked in righteousness before God and man, and miracles were occurring. And their faith was up here. They thought he was going to be the Redeemer. I mean, talk about incredible faith. But at this moment, their faith has been whittled down to nothing. He's dead. We know that the woman had a hallucination. And when they came, they couldn't find the body, but they didn't see him like the women did. They didn't see nothing spectacular. They probably took the body. How horrible. They just didn't know. And their faith was so low. And perhaps you come and your faith is weak. It is low. The Lord knows where you are. You see, in their weariness and in their weakness of faith, when they're walking on their journey of treachery, because this was a distressing journey for them away from Jerusalem. They were giving up. That's what they were doing. When they were walking back home, they were giving up. And that is the very road that a companion came alongside them. They didn't recognize him. They had such heavy hearts they couldn't see. They were so downcast they couldn't hardly look up. They were so involved in their own dilemma that they couldn't see that help was at hand. But help had arrived. Help had arrived. And if you have a heavy heart, if you have weak faith, the Lord is here. The Lord is here. You know, when you are preoccupied by things, it causes the Lord to seem very distant. Sometimes our lives get so busy and so preoccupied with things that we're not focused on Him the way we should be, and that distance occurs and that separation happens, and sometimes it's our own fault. But you know, sometimes circumstances come into our life that preoccupy us and we have no control over it. And just the busyness of the moment, just the distress of what's going on can cause us to feel like the Lord is distant. Where did He go? But the Lord is there. Don't trust your feelings. You got to trust the Lord. So He's walking right with them and they don't even know it. And if you are His child, no matter what you are going through, you may not recognize it, but He hasn't left you. He is right by your side. They invited Him. They didn't know who He was, but they invited Him to come into their house. And then it's just a little bit interesting to me here because it's their house. Why is He the one that's picking up the bread and blessing it and breaking it and giving thanks and and going to pass it out. I mean, if it's my house, I'll say the blessing, thank you. No, I might let you say the blessing, but it's their house. But it almost looks like Jesus is taking some authority here. He's taking some role of leadership. Something about him says, let him do it. Maybe they just felt too pathetic to bless the bread. I don't know. You do it. You haven't been cumbered by all of this. And so they welcomed his blessing at the table of fellowship. See this table over here? We call it communion. It's a table of communion. And the word communion means fellowship. This is a table of fellowship. And I know that we are the ones that pray, but let me tell you what, it's the Lord's blessing over this that makes it everything that it is. You come to a good place. And I believe that the Lord himself is here. And it was as the Lord broke the bread, their eyes were opened, and they saw who he was. Poof, he was gone. They got what they needed, though, in that moment. And when we come to a time of communion, I believe that you can get what you need at this moment. Not because I'm your pastor, not because we have wonderful brethren that pass out the elements, but because it's the Lord's table. He instituted this, and it's his blessing that accompanies it. And where the Lord seemed distant before, as you take these emblems in your hand and you examine them, you may find him close again. Because if his love seemed distant before, the body and the bread, the blood and the wine, speak of his love to you one more time. One more time. I'm going to ask my brethren to come up. They're going to prepare to pass out communion this morning.